Welcome to the Future Series. I'm your host, Anthony Down, and for those of you that are new to the podcast, we talk with real founders about building a business for the future. So whether you're scaling your business currently or starting your first side hustle, we aim to give you the nuggets of information to help you succeed in the future of work. This podcast is brought to you by Brellard Consulting. Brellard works with companies around the world to design, build, and implement AI systems and business processes to help your company leverage the newest technologies that they develop. If you're interested to know more, just get in touch. But today we've got Sandeep Sharma on the podcast from Vmarsh. How are things going, Sandeep?
Well, busy Thursday afternoon,
Yeah.
It's always that way. The days you expect, things to be as busy as you wanted them to be, they're okay. And the days you don't expect them, they're just going out of the roof. So it's good, but it's good busy. So yes, I'm enjoying it.
Excellent. Well, I'm really glad that you've taken the time and managed to find the time to jump on.
My pleasure.
Those of you that, or for people who are listening that haven't heard of Vmarsh or yourself, Sandeep, are you able to give us a quick intro and overview of yourself and what you do?
Perfect. So I think I'll put it this way. As far as I go, I'm Sandeep Sharma. I'm the CEO of Vmarsh Healthcare. By background, I'm a biotechnologist and an MBA. The simplest way I can put it is I never lived in one place more than 5 years. I think I mentioned that to you, Anthony. And Dubai is where I'm based now, which is actually, and ironically, the only place that I'm now in my 7th year. So the first and the only place that, I'm in my 7th year. But Vmarsh is a global healthcare consulting, academic and advisory firm. We work with 6 offices: Chicago, Dublin, Dubai, Riyadh, Mumbai, Kuala Lumpur. And we have associate offices in about 11 countries. Our team, which is about 98 people now, just very, very shy of 100, are based in about 37 countries. So we're a very global firm working closely with hospitals, ministries of health, associated and related industries to healthcare and life sciences. So yeah, that should give you a quick picture.
Yeah, absolutely perfect. Great overview. I'd love to hear that. What I'd love to do is, if we look back to maybe the start of your career or early on in your career, and look at where you started and how things developed and how you came to be Vmarsh and what you are today. But if you look back, what was sort of the bit that started all of this? So you mentioned you were a biotechnician before.
Biotechnologist, yes. So I think I was never a settler, even growing up. I mean, even with my mom and dad being executives in, corporate white collar people, we moved a lot, growing up. So I always saw them travel and move around and unsettle. So I think that's stuck to me. And career wise, I think I started out from biotechnology into working in the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, to take a few steps back, I loved medicine. I loved traveling. I loved geography, so I was one of those bipolar kids in school, who would just doze off when, the lectures would be in physics or chemistry, and I would be the best when it would be biology or geography. So I was very, both ends in some way, and I was never a settler. So I always wanted to do and try different things to bring everything that I like together in its own shape and size. And I think that's essentially what I've done. So I started off in pharmaceuticals for a biosimilar and biotechnology company in South Asia, doing a lot of work for nephrology business, the kidney disease. And at that time, I was given a choice to directly jump into these nice white collar, air conditioned, comfortable chair office in a different company. And I was given a choice to start deep in the mud, hustling and selling and all that. And I chose the latter because I'm like, I don't think this is the age and time to get comfortable. This is when you make sure that you're not comfortable, So that's why I started with pharmaceutical sales, which led to me doing things very differently from the way it would typically be done. For example, I still remember a lot of sales reps were not allowed to go into hospitals at certain hours. And I would always go in, in a very different way, find doctors in parking lots, find them in their cafes, and actually never talk to them about selling, because selling actually means not selling. When you don't sell, you sell, basically, So I would talk a lot to them about what they're up to, what really bothers them, what keeps them up. And, they would remember me. And if they would remember me, they would remember where and what I was there for. So actually, I never even mentioned the products that I was selling. Because what you do in sales is when you start mentioning something too much, people put sort of a mute button on that and they actually don't listen. So I did just the opposite to make sure that they ask me, by the way, where do you work and what brand are you talking about? So that sort of got me going, and that led me to do brand management for the same organization, which usually would hire these fancy Ivy League MBA school kids, and I was just a guy who had just started in sales and had just worked 2 years in my career. So I was now in this room sitting with all these guys thinking, who the hell is this guy? I mean, how is he even sitting here? What is he doing here? He's not one of us. So I also found opportunity in solitude because I would always be, left on my own and stuff. And that sort of got me to do things again out of the box. And that led me to become a portfolio manager from just one brand manager. And I think I was 3 years in this, and I'm like, I think I've put a straw and sucked out everything that I have to suck out from pharmaceutical and this organization. And as I said, the unsettler mindset. So at the time, I was thinking to sort of see how I could move out and get more back into the international market because, as I said, I love biology and geography. So I said, I'm satisfying the biology, but the geography is still kind of missing. I started looking at international roles and I stumbled upon something which was a Valencian organization in IVF, which had nothing to do with what I was doing. I was pharmaceutical nephrology, and this was IVF, infertility. This was Asia, this was Europe. So I was like, perfect. I'm going to take the job which I know nothing about versus people who would take a job which they know everything about, because I knew the one thing that I can do is sell. And if I can sell, I'm sure as hell that I can sell myself in that interview. So I went into IVF and I think I oversatisfied the geography part because I was working for this organization in Valencia. But I would spend 1 week in Nigeria, Ghana, the next week in Ethiopia, Kenya, the next week in South Africa, the next week in North Africa. So to the point that sometimes when I would wake up, it would take 4 or 5 seconds for me to realize what corner of Africa am I in now. So, and peep outside the hotel room. But I was like, this is what I wanted. So I spent a lot of time in IVF, which was basically because the company in Spain wanted to be everywhere on the planet. And they knew that how do we get somewhere without really getting there? And because of that, I was spending a lot of time to see how with poor regulations, without much of quality control and such, how in certain places can we still set up IVF business? And that led me to somehow finding my way into medical tourism and tech. And I'm talking about tech before AI existed, before, I'm talking about the Nokia and the Sony Ericsson era, when even Skype was this new big thing where you could just talk to someone on video, and these fancy organizations had Cisco and nothing more.
The
So
good
we
old
set up
days.
exactly. I mean those days, and actually I'm sidetracking, but I'm actually very happy that our generation is one of those few which saw the pre-internet era, and then we also saw what we see today. Everything AI. So a lot of my work was to see how we can get people to visit the clinic in Spain, and they also had JVs in India and in Central South Americas. So medical tourism was a way where we would talk to a lot of hospitals to tie up with the Spanish hospital. We would work with Cisco and WebEx systems to see how telemedicine could be accessed to places which don't have access to such healthcare. And with that, we also focused on doing a lot of tie-ups with ministries of health, especially in Nigeria. And somehow I got myself into achieving our business target through an election campaign in Nigeria, because it was also the time when the national polls were on. And I still remember, without naming people, but there were certain senior ministers in Nigeria who said, what you're doing can become a good election agenda for us. And I said, okay, I'm here. So we started campaigning for IVF and infertility as an agenda for the elections, the general elections, by the way, to announce that anyone who's looking at has infertility issues or is not able to get through to start a family, the new government, the guys who were campaigning, that they would sponsor and look at a lot of such endorsements if they win the elections. It was like, you found the perfect wave to surf. You just
Yeah.
don't do anything, you just ride the wave basically. So I think that worked well, and that way we then wanted to replicate this model in Asia. So I left Asia to Europe and Africa, but found myself back in Asia. I moved to Singapore then, and by now I had done a lot of different things, in different places. So I was the master of jack of all, like the master
Yeah.
of doing everything. Basically, that's a hybrid word that I've come up with. And I think people like this end up somehow naturally or inorganically in consulting, and that's what happened with me. So I started doing a lot of these freelance projects with Frost and Sullivan, McKinsey, IMS, and Quantiles, which is now IQVIA. And I was also in parallel doing my MBA, in Singapore, which was an executive MBA. Again, I was never an academician, so I think, again, sold myself to the institution, which is one of the top 15, 20 Forbes listed institutions, without actually giving the qualifying examination. Just on the application, I'm like, I'm going for this because I don't know if I have it in me to really read all those books and do all that, because I think I had seen too much, by then
Yeah.
on the grounds. So that led me to Singapore, and I did a lot of work for independent healthcare institutions, IVF companies, rehab companies. The program, the MBA, took me to Sydney, and in parallel, I was also working for a rehab and geriatric facility, which was an elderly care, not making enough money. And it was more about reading the nerve. And I realized Australia is a lot about having breakfast at 4 a.m., lunch at 11 a.m., and dinner at 4. So and a lot of sunrise surfing. But
Yeah.
apart from that, they basically love sports. They love being healthy. So I said, let's get that into the mix. And that's how I got sports rehab introduced into a geriatric facility, which made the money, sort of funded the rehab for elderly care. And by then, I was already looking at full-time roles, and I was then offered this role with one of this business risk and advisory consulting firms, which is based in Chicago but has offices all over. So I think through this whole journey, what I realized is a couple of things. One, sometimes the jargons and the complicated processes are overrated. You just have to be more human. You have to read what you really read and not what the book tells you or what you've been told to see. So you have to somewhere follow that. Second, you have to take risks. It's this simple. And I know I'm sounding very redundant, but it's just that if you've done something and it makes sense to people, people will say, we always knew you'll do it. We always knew you were right. We always knew you can make it. And if you don't, people are like, I always knew that guy can't do anything. And I always told you that don't do this. So it's a simplified statement, but that's sort of true.
Yeah.
And that's how I moved to Dubai. And I still remember when I left Sydney, it was about 8 degrees Celsius. And I landed in Dubai 49 degrees Celsius. And before this, I had lived in the UK. I had lived in the mountains in India. I had lived a lot in Europe and in Australia, which doesn't get that extreme. And now suddenly I'm in this place where it's the opposite culturally of what I'd been used to, which is being outdoors and in the grass.
Yeah.
But I think when I look back, it just all adds up. So in Dubai, I started my career consulting for a business risk and governance organization. But they wanted to build healthcare strategy, and I bought a lot of everything that I had done, applied here. But working with large consulting firms, and I have great respect for them. There's so much I've learned from them. Led me to think, what's missing? What's not making sense? And then I realized somehow a lot of people are just following the big brand name without really seeing what value they get from it. I mean, of course, those organizations over decades did so well that they became a brand. But the question is, if something has become a brand, is it still a brand today? Is it still living up to its name? Because if you think and apply a little bit of reverse psychology, people who haven't become that brand will try harder and do more for you versus the people who've arrived and have become that brand.
Yeah.
And that led me to think that, somehow I see that There's one or two senior people in the organization who are like, I know it all sort of a person, who are selling organizations what the organizations really need, being very different from what they're selling, and only being able to sell because of those clients finding comfort in those big brands.
Yeah.
And that made me realize that somehow, there are these cute 20-year-old MBAs, and I was also an MBA. I mean, but a lot of these cute 20-year-old MBAs telling 50, 60-year-old CEOs that this is your strategy and this is what you need to be doing, which to me didn't make sense. So somewhere that's where the whole thing about Vmarsh came into existence. By the way, Vmarsh is a Sanskrit word which actually means consulting and counseling. So I realized that there are so many of those people who've worked within healthcare for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, who actually could be the ones giving these clients, which are hospitals and ministries of health and associations, the real advice. And
Yeah.
that's where I thought, that's what I want to give these organizations, because if I get them that, the branding and the marketing becomes a byproduct by itself. So what I did was, uh, because by now I had traveled to 50, 55 odd countries, met thousands of wonderful people on the planet. So I started reaching out and seeing how I could get them together to actually help these clients. So I'm talking about people who have been chief nursing officers and have been in nursing for 40, 50 years and have done nursing in about 20, 25 countries. People who've been senior ministers, people who've actually grown organizations from a small or mid-sized organization to really a listed organization. Physicians who've actually written down policies for new physicians, salaries, and done that for Ivy League institutions. So I got the real people who, when we're put in front of the client, we didn't even have to sell, because the clients that are also people who, when saw these people, realized, oh, you were my mentor 20 years ago. Oh, you were someone I always looked up to. You were someone whose articles or literature I've read. And that automatically, you know,
Builds the trust.
exactly, build that trust. And because that build that trust, there was satisfaction. Because there was satisfaction, Vmarsh became a brand. And that's why so quickly, with a lot of difficulties and ups and downs, we grew to become this global organization where we are just about equity, connection, value, but also remembering that we're human. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's how it
That's
came about.
That's amazing. I love the story and how you kept moving and looking at different things. It seems like you've basically just traveled the world and sort of absorbed all this knowledge from around the world in different countries and different regions, and then been able to come and sort of synthesize it with Vmarsh. Did you always know that you wanted to set up your own business in the end, or?
I think I did because, as I said, I loved biology and I loved business. And in my career, I realized somehow there are these great organizations which have great people, but it's not always the skill which leads to success. It's actually how enduring you are, how disciplined you are, how much grit you have. So I see a lot of large organizations focusing on hiring people with the high CGPA or experience and all, but somehow all brownie points and stars, but no grit
Yeah.
leads to nowhere. Versus people who have half of those stars but have the grit, because eventually to do something you have to drive through. You might buy the nicest shoes, but if you don't have the stamina to run long enough, are you even winning the race? Versus someone who's wearing mediocre shoes but has built the endurance and the grit to run. So that's the analogy that I'll apply to this. Somehow a lot of great organizations, the product, the strategy gets left aside because of the culture. I read online, one of my close friends, who's also CEO in the GCC in the hospital, very, very well respected doctor. She recently wrote that, and it's a very common saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast, basically. So no matter how much strategy you build and you write these documents and brand plans and sales plans, culturally, if people are not able to get through, you get nowhere. And that's sort of what I saw in a lot of organizations, which is it's not business management, but it's more culture and politics management. It's more about how do I save myself? How do I make myself look good versus realizing that if you focus on the real business and the real goals, looking good will become a byproduct or a result of that and not the other way around. And that's why I was like, I want to see what I can do by fully giving my energy and, resilience and grit, and see where grit gets you. Because
Yeah.
there's something that I've always believed in, and I think I will always believe in, which is a code that says the difference between dream and accomplishment is truly desire. I'm basically on a journey to test that out.
Amazing. I know you've spoken about the sales side and how important that was through your career and growing, especially in this world now, this sort of AI world. What skills do you think are the most important that people should be focusing on and learning? Because you've got AI maybe is one bit, but relationship and sales, I would argue that if you're building a career in sales or even jumping in sales, that's going to help you build your grit.
Absolutely, because see, we live in such unprecedented times. We don't know where AI is going. I mean, what probably I presented in conferences 2 years ago is now invalid because AI has eaten itself up to come up with something new. So I think people need to think about how and what do I do to make sure that I'm valid, and that validity is not about a technical skill, but it's more about a humane or empathetic skill. And I'm coming to a subject which is very close to me, which is humanizing healthcare in the digital age. And it's not just applied to healthcare, it can apply to any industry and people in sales. Robotic selling can happen, and AI can do that. But the real test is how do you remain human? And so far, AI can't become more human than human beings. So I think being human is the most important skill, because there was a survey 15, 20 years ago that I did for one of the organizations where I worked, that it's actually not the selling, but it's actually the consumer behavior and the consumer psychology. Once you grab that, you grab everything. I might put all my technology in a pen, which is great and so sexy and is perfect, but if I'm overselling it and just being very robotic, I might not sell it. Versus I pick up a very simple pen, but sell it with all my conviction and empathy and emotion and build a story around it. You might, you know, I mean, for example, people pass on pens from generation to generation, and that is what builds weightage in that pen versus, oh, this pen can do this and write that. So selling is not about abundance, but selling is more about connection, I think, and that's something which will always stay. So AI is evolving. We are in the unknown. Um, I might say build this skill or get this certification, which may no longer exist tomorrow. So I think it's more about knowing how to remain human, having the grit, being resilient, being street smart and academic, so that you know how to find your way with, where you go. Be like water. Water can take any shape and still exist. So, I
Which
think
he's saying.
exactly. So I think you need to get a little flexible and fluidic as possible, because
Yeah.
uh, I said somewhere very recently that there are organizations that spend hundreds, thousands, or even millions in branding. I mean, organizations put their logos on Formula Ones and fashion weeks and airlines and these big billboards on roads, versus a, because I'm in healthcare, I'll give a healthcare example. A patient who's come out of a hospital happy and telling his brother or cousin or wife or daughter or friend, hey, I went here. They are really genuine. They're really great. Who do you think that person is going to listen to? The billboard that he saw on Formula One racetrack, or his friend who he trusts? Because somehow that billboard is actually giving you more systematic information, but this friend or acquaintance of yours is giving you humane, empathetic information. And that tells us that we process empathetic data more quickly than technical data.
Absolutely, especially with something like healthcare that's very, very important to everyone. It's that trust thing again. You need to have faith that this is the
Absolutely.
right product, the right service that you're going with. What when you started Vmarsh then, what were those next 12 months like? How like water did you have to be in terms of pivoting and ducking and diving?
Well, I would say if I aimed for the North Pole, I ended up on the South Pole. And that's what always happens. And I want to tell this to founders because I am this nerd who has to have every detail and everything. I'm a guy who has OCD who has to plan everything to the dot. And not even a dot of what I planned happened when I started. I think it's important to have this framework of what you want to achieve without getting very stuck on how you want to achieve it. It's like you're in Greece right now. If I want to get to Greece, I should just focus on not how I get to Greece, but getting to Greece. Flying, swimming, cycling, you'll
Yeah,
plan on flying, you'll end up swimming. You'll plan on swimming, you'll end up sailing. You don't know. Focus on where you want to get and don't close your eyes during that journey, because if you keep your eyes open, let's say you're sailing to Greece, you might say, oh, I was on my way to Greece and I now saw I'm just giving a silly example, but I saw Montenegro because I like my Montenegro as a side note. But because I kept my eyes open, now I know that this place exists and it's beautiful. So the same thing applies when you're on your entrepreneurial journey. You think starting that this is what you'll do, and you realize something which you didn't even know is what you'll end up doing. To give you a specific answer, when I started out in consulting and strategy consulting, I thought I'll focus more and build more on the strategic and the medical tourism side and this side and that side, which I did, but there was this whole different tangent of me thinking of so many things which I never thought of, from patient safety to nursing to operations, which now I'm doing. So you need to somehow seize the moment, but also not get so lost in whatever comes your way, because a lot of people do the opposite. They say, I'm just going to go with the flow, which is true. But if you go too much with the flow, you'll just keep flowing and spread yourself thin, and you don't want to do that. So you also have to find this balance between anchoring what your goals are and seeing where it takes you.
yeah, I love it. There's a metaphor that I was always told, which is ready, fire, aim. Basically, say you've got to get out and go do it. A bit like Richard Branson's book, just screw it, let's do it. Going
Exactly.
out and then pivoting. But as long as you know the end goal or where you want to be at the end, it's never ever going to be a straight line. I think everyone that I've had on, I always ask a question about how's the first 12 months, and it's always yeah.
No, I love what Richard Branson says, because I read one of his interviews and he said, he said that he went to a lot of these meetings where he said he can do it, and then he stayed up all night to read and learn how to do it, and then he did it. So if you suss out what that means, it basically means grit, right? Because it was that grit that said he challenged himself that, oh, I can do it, without actually knowing how to do it. And then the grit and the discipline kept him going to actually learn and actually do it.
Yeah. How did you find it? Obviously, like you said, you didn't hit any of these points that you'd written down for your first year. From a mindset point of view, what was that like?
I think, people who have pets might understand this example better, but you have to treat your brain like a Labrador or a British Shorthair, whichever one you like or whichever breed you have, basically, because of course there's a lot of self-doubt that kicks in. There's a lot of these challenges. As I said, if you look doubtful, if you look negative, more people will pull you down and weigh you down to say, see, we told you, don't go on this journey and find a job and just be comfortable, because they are comfortable. So somehow you have to learn how to give your brain a little bit of that anesthesia to say, you know what, I'm going to become so focused on what I'm doing and have that tunnel vision, because it helps. Somehow the more noise you cut out and the more tunnel vision you are, you get to where you want. Because I did this small exercise where you make someone, and we did this in Australia and Sydney when I was working with that geriatric rehab facility. We got one of the elderly patients out into cold water and we said, oh, this water is lovely, you should take a dip, it's so nice, it's perfect, it's good for the skin, it's good for the body. That 82-year-old lady happily went in the water because there was no distractions. On the other hand, we got about 8 people on the next day to say, this water is too cold, but it's good for you. And then none of those 8 went in. The same water, the same temperature, the same setting. So often you limit your own capacity, you limit your own self because you have all these noises. And I think entrepreneurially, you learn a lot about yourself. There's a lot about yourself that you did not know, and now you know. You're like, wow, I didn't know that I could do this. Wow, I did not know that I could not do this. Wow, I did not know that I will learn this so quickly, So that's very important. That's very important to know that uh, how to silence people, and you have to become shameless to some point. I mean, in the realm of being civilized, but you have to become shameless because a lot of people who jump from having a satisfying 9 to 5 have somehow become very comfortable of doing things in a way they're like, oh no, no, how can I approach someone? I don't know the guy. But I'm like, reach out and then you'll know the guy. So you have to do
Yeah.
those things.
Yeah, you have to care less about what people think. Otherwise, you'll just be trying to run around, please everyone, and you won't get anywhere. I think,
Exactly.
particularly well, I'm from the UK, so I've got that frame to look at it through. But everyone's so polite or trying to be so polite, like, oh, I couldn't possibly ask them, I don't know them, or this or that. And it's the people that do have that maybe more American attitude of just like, let's go, let's have a chat, let's jump in, speak to a stranger.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think I mentioned I grew up in the UK, so I exactly know what you're talking about, the etiquettes and the manners and that. But again, I think things are not how they were 20 years ago, especially because of overexposure and over socialization with everything, which is also good because someone in the UK 20 years ago would have, as you and I are saying, not being able to approach someone, but today might be because he or she is now exposed to Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and LinkedIn and all this, and they say, "Oh, everyone's reaching out to everyone. What the hell? Let's reach out." So that definitely has done a lot of good because you had to travel to a certain place to know the culture or how and what, and now all you have to do is burn 1 calorie to press that button on your screen.
Yeah, burn 1 calorie and then lose a few hours. Doom scrolling. Amazing. So, in terms of the future of Vmarsh, then, particularly when it comes to new technologies, like you mentioned already, AI, and how that's progressing at a rapid pace, how is that influencing your work in terms of what you're consulting on and what you're advising on?
I think it's done good, and I wouldn't say bad, but it's made us evolve and keep us on our toes. The good part of it is, for example, because we have clients all over the world, a lot of our meetings happen on Zoom. And now, these minutes of meeting, which normally would take our office assistants or junior team to type, 20, 25 minutes, is now transcribed and emailed to you in 30 seconds after you hang up a call. One example on a daily basis that we use, but I think where it becomes very useful for us is with AI. There are a lot of people who are risk averse. There are a lot of people who are more jittery and early learners and early explorers to understand how and what to do. And that sort of makes our role important, going back to the part that I said, which is the human part. And in healthcare, we see these days there is a lot of digitization. Obviously, it saves cost, it reduces time, and it's efficient. And I think this applies to most industries. But when it comes to healthcare, healthcare is actually health care, which means healing, which means empathy. We see that a lot of organizations now are sort of making the medical staff sit behind and let AI take the wheel, which I don't think should happen for everything. Because, for example, 20 years ago, whatever time doctors would spend in front of the screen has now quadrupled. So 20 years ago, doctors would interact more with the patient.
Yeah.
Now they're like this and they don't even look at the patient sometimes. So there are things like those. So I think from an intelligence point of view, to make sure that it's a good balance of technology and experience is where we come in, because as I said, our whole business model is based on people who've had 20, 30, 40 years of experience clinically or strategically or technologically or mathematically in healthcare. So how that experience can be combined with data, which is now available because of AI and big data, to come together and then make the best of those balanced decisions versus over AI decisions, So that's in a nutshell and in a very oversimplified way, me telling you where we are relevant today. As we go along, I think if you talk to people in healthcare, and I'm very proud to say this, and you say Vmarsh, people will be like, oh, that organization that has a lot of senior people and helps organizations with accreditation, quality, medical tourism. I mean, just yesterday, someone who I don't know told me that, oh, you're the guy who's CEO of Vmarsh, and you guys do this, this, and this, and this, right? I'm like, yeah, so I think that's where we want to continue on that path, which is making people feel that we are that human arm and the human support of advisory, knowledge, academia available to healthcare organizations, And going back to the previous point, I just said that, because of technology, you can sit anywhere and have exposure to anywhere. So that's actually happening in healthcare. A lot of benchmarking is happening. I mean, earlier, North America had a way of doing business, Europe had a way of business, Asia had a way of business, Africa had a way of business. Now, all that is getting intertwined, and somehow that's where we are also acting as a bridge, which is to bring a lot of the know-hows from Europe to the Middle East, take a lot of know-hows from the Middle East to Latin America, bring a lot of Asian know-hows to apply to places in Africa. So there's a lot of this cross-cultural leeway that we're able to give to organizations, very simply because we're very globally based. And often organizations want to hear, I mean, if you meet someone tomorrow from a country that you've never been, you will be like, oh, wow, I would love to know about this person, versus you meet someone who's in your neighborhood, you're like, okay, fine, sure, whatever. So that
Yeah.
that makes sense in healthcare too. Organizations want to learn what other organizations in very different regions are doing, to know, are they good or are they good? Are they doing better or are they doing better? Because somewhere we all are competitive, which actually is part of being human.
Yeah, I love it. I love it, and completely, yeah, agree. Completely agree. Before we wrap up, then, obviously you've had an amazing global career that's you've been able to leverage and obviously put in a lot of time and effort, but build out this amazing company, Vmarsh. If you're talking to maybe someone who's currently sat in a class doing their biology and their geography, or someone who's maybe in one of their first jobs who want to end up with running their own company one day and having all the success, what sort of advice would you give to them?
I would tell them the same thing, that don't run behind a position, don't run behind a brand. Run behind what you know you will enjoy, because it's this simple. It's a very simple Lego puzzle. If you love something, you will follow through. You will do it no matter what, versus you getting influenced by that society saying that this is what you should do, and by this age you should have this, by this age you should do this. Follow whatever makes you happy, as long as you sleep peaceful at night, and wake up looking forward to doing what you do, you're in the right job or in the right place. Because if you don't enjoy what you're doing, no matter your qualifications, no matter where you've started, you're not going to get anywhere. Versus if you enjoy doing something, you make something out of it. I mean, 20 years ago or 30 years ago, everyone wanted to either become a doctor or an engineer or work in the government services. I mean, those were the easy choices. If you told someone 25 or 30 years ago, I love, doing people's hair and I love cutting hair, your parents would be like, what's wrong with you, kid? I mean, do something better. But today you have brands like Tony and Guy, you have these big hair salons, you have these big houses that do hair makeovers. 50 years ago, if you said to someone, oh, I want to become a DJ and I want to mix music, people were like, what's wrong with you? But because you loved doing that so much that you followed through, is why you do it. And that's why, or how you become the CEO of this hair company or the best DJ in the world. So stop chasing the title that I want to become the CEO. Focus on what you love and what you really can follow through, because It's all about discipline and grit. If you have discipline and grit, getting knowledge is a byproduct, you know. Getting a good job, getting good money is all a byproduct as long as you are doing it and doing it right.
I love it. Really, really good advice there. Thank you so much for taking the time today and jumping on the call. If any of the listeners wants to reach out or get in touch with Vmarsh, what's the best way?
First of all, thanks, Anthony, for having me. It was so good, and I think somehow I love linking philosophy and strategy because a good strategy is nothing but where psychology and technicalities meet, basically. So I think I love this conversation. If anyone wants to reach out to us, they can write to us on info.healthcare@vmarsh.com. That's INFOHEALTHKARE at vmarsh.com, or they can just look us up on Google or ChatGPT, and that will direct them to our LinkedIn page or our website. And then there's a way that they can tap in a message, and that will reach us. So always happy to help people and inspire people.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Sandeep. Absolute pleasure to have you on.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you so much. Cheers.
Excellent. And thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll see you next time.